Marriage is difficult, and sometimes staying married can be hard as well. The latest studies I've been able to find, dating back to about 2018, tell us that somebody who marries today, in 10 years, there's a 41% likelihood that they will divorce. And as you and I look around us, and sometimes even look among ourselves, we see that divorce seems to be an option by more and more people. And so I want us to take a few moments to talk about marriage and what we can do to make our marriages stronger. And here in a little bit, we're going to look at 5 keys to strengthening your marriage. But before we do that, let's go ahead and turn in our Bibles to Matthew chapter 19 and verse 9 and see what God says about marriage, divorce, and remarriage. Matthew 19:9 is the only passage which explicitly tells us about marriage and divorce and remarriage as well. And that passage tells us, Matthew 19:9, this is New King James that I'm reading, says, "And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery. And whoever marries her who is divorced also commits adultery." Now, as you look at that passage, what you see is marriage is honored by God. God created marriage in the very beginning with Adam and Eve. He made sure marriage existed through the Mosaic covenant of the Old Testament, and he honors marriage even today. We see that in Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 4. And so it's important for us to study this. Now, oftentimes I'll have people who will come into my church office and they want marital counseling. And of course, I'm not a counselor, but oftentimes as a preacher, I can listen, and oftentimes I can offer what the Bible teaches. So often a wife will come in and she'll say, "Oh, I want you to fix my husband." Or a husband will come in and say, "Hey, listen, you need to tell my wife how to act. You need to fix her." Well, the thing that we know very quickly and very importantly is we can't fix anybody. You cannot force anybody to feel a certain thing, and you can very rarely make anybody do a certain thing consistently. Notice what Peter teaches in 1 Peter chapter 3, beginning in verse 1. In this passage, he's talking about wives who have husbands who are not Christians. And he says, "Wives, likewise be submissive even to your own husbands, that even if some do not obey, they without a word may be won to the Lord by the conduct of their wives, when they observe your chaste conduct accompanied by fear. Don't let your adornment be merely outward, arranging the hair, wearing gold, or putting on fine apparel, but rather let it be the hidden person of the heart, with the incorruptible beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is very precious in the sight of God." Now skip down to verse 7. "Husbands, likewise, dwell with them with understanding, giving honor to your wife as to the weaker vessel, and being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers may not be hindered." What we see there is oftentimes the key to helping your marriage be better is looking to yourself. Seeing what you can do, what you are doing to feed into the dynamic that's going on in the marriage. To see if something you did would help improve the relationship which is there. Now, of course, there are times when there's abuse. And nobody deserves to be abused. Nobody deserves to be hurt. You're created in the image of God. And God does not expect that for anyone. But in many cases, as we look to ourselves, we can improve our marriages. So what are those 5 keys? Key number 1 is this: a heart of forgiveness. As you learn to forgive, your marriage will get better and better. In Matthew chapter 18, Peter came before Jesus and he announced that he would forgive somebody up to 7 times. The Pharisees said they would do it 3. Jesus said, "I want you to forgive 70 times 7 times. In other words, we are to be continually forgiving of one another. Don't bring up what your spouse did a week or a month or a year ago. Be careful when in your arguments you keep bringing up petty things which happened long in the past. Learn to forgive." In Colossians chapter 3 and verse 13, that passage says, "Bear with one another, and if anyone has a complaint against another, forgive each other as the Lord has forgiven you, so you also should forgive." When you learn to forgive, oftentimes your marriage will improve greatly. Secondly, we notice personal relationship skills. So often when we're dating, we really take care of ourselves. We're really polite. We'll open the door for our wives. We, do all sorts of things like that. And then sometimes once we marry, those habits kind of disappear. Work on those personal relationship skills. What kind of person are you? What kind of Christian are you? How do you treat your spouse? There needs to be a level of kindness. There need to be manners. There needs to be a work ethic, a willingness to help out around the house, a willingness to help with the yard, a willingness to help financially. That's an important thing for each and every one of us to know. A third key which we see is unselfishness. In John chapter 13, about a day before Jesus was placed upon the cross, Jesus, even though he was the Son of God, put on the garment of a slave and he began washing feet. The ultimate act of service in that culture in that time. And he said, as you have seen me do, so also you are to do to one another. Matthew 5:39 says, if somebody slaps you on the cheek, show him the other. If someone takes your tunic, give him your robe. If someone compels you to walk a mile, you go with him too. Ephesians 6, husbands are told to love their wives so much that they give their bodies for them. That they nourish their wife, that they treasure their wife, that they care for their wife in every single way, that they're unselfish. And wives are told to submit and to love their husbands as well. Number 4, conflict resolution. I often tell people when they're talking about getting married, we're doing premarital counseling, you got to learn how to fight. Now, you'll see some people who have been married 50 years, and at that 50-year anniversary, they'll say, well, we've never had a fight. Those people define fighting a different way. Because anytime you have two people, you're going to have conflict resolution. Otherwise, a relationship cannot exist. And so, yes, they fight, but they may not yell at each other. Yes, they fight, but they may not get angry. There has to be conflict resolution. Learn how to fight properly. And when you do that, it really improves your marriage and helps it to go well. Understand what the issue is that you're fighting about. And make sure that's exactly what it is. Find a good time to discuss it and settle the issue before it begins to fester or before it becomes worse. Now, the fifth key to saving your marriage is love. Now, love in this sense, we're not talking about romance. We're not talking about what's easy. Love in this sense is not talking about what happened when you met your spouse. It's talking about loving your spouse even when it's hard. In Romans chapter 5 and verse 8, Paul writes, discussing the love of God, and while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Jesus didn't just die for good people or for righteous people. He died for rebellious sinners. That's the level of love that exists for each and every one of us. Read with me, if you will, 1 Corinthians chapter 13. And let's begin in verse 4. Love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself, and it is not prideful or puffed up. Love does not behave rudely. It does not seek its own. It is not provoked. It thinks no evil. It does not rejoice in iniquity, but it rejoices in the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Verse 8, love never fails. If you're struggling in your marriage, pray. If you're struggling in your marriage, do everything you can to save it. It's an honor to God whenever a marriage is saved and both a husband and wife are brought closer to God. And here are the 5 keys of how you can improve your marriage. Have a heart of forgiveness. Develop your personal relationship skills, the way in which you treat one another with kindness. Be unselfish. Be a servant to your spouse. Learn how to fight. Learn how to communicate. Learn how to settle issues. And in every case, show love.